Another great message, as we know, is giving back gives back. How volunteering fuels careers and community. This panel is presented by PRI. Our moderator on this panel, Kim Pendergast, the CEO and owner of Magnuson Products. Kim is the managing partner of Pendergast Partners, a private equity management company that invests in technology companies in the automotive aftermarket industry. She's also the chairman and CEO of a portfolio company, Magnuson Products, LLC, and was a previous investor in MSD Ignition and CEO and owner of Arrington Engines, who did R&D for Dodge and engines for NASCAR teams. By 45, Kim founded, funded, and built 5 companies, 2 growing from 0 to 7 million and 100 million in sales in less than a year. Kim has served on 14 private and not-for-profit boards, most recently joined the board of Sema, the trade organization for the $50 billion automotive aftermarket industry. Please welcome Kim to the stage. Karen Bailey is the chairman, SVP, Public and Government Affairs for Sema and PRI. Karen is passionate about leading advocacy, public policy, and government affairs strategies, and has dedicated her career to creating and delivering unique and effective initiatives. She has directed strategic and tactical implementation of innovative campaigns while driving legislative wins, consumer engagement, and industry best practices. She holds a bachelor's degree of political science and leadership studies and was a graduate of the inaugural class of the Virginia Women's Institute for Leadership at Mary Baldwin University. She earned her master's degree from Penn State. She also spent 4 years at the Virginia Military Institute before getting her degrees. Karen Bailey to the stage. Rena Shanaman is the event director of the Detroit Grand Prix. Her sports management career began over 40 years ago with the creation of a volunteer organization for Detroit's inaugural Formula One Grand Prix, which became a model for other motorsports events. She's organized the inaugural US 500 at Michigan International Speedway in 1996, and for the past 3 decades helped manage numerous races throughout North America, as well as Mario Andretti's final IndyCar season in 1994, known as Arrivederci Mario. From 1996 to 2003, Rena served as Vice President of Promoter Relationships for CART. And most recently, and as we saw on the big screen earlier today, and one that deserves another big round of applause, Rena helped launch the Detroit chapter of WIMNA and currently serves as its president. And also joining us on this panel is Melanie White. She is the CEO of Hellwig Products. Melanie started Hellwig's sales department cold calling nearly 21 years ago, working her way up to vice president before ultimately becoming the company's first female CEO. She represents the 4th generation to join the family business, established by her great-grandfather in 1946. Hellwig is a founding SEMA member company and has exhibited since the very first SEMA show in 1967 at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. She was named SEMA Person of the Year in 2018 and awarded SEMA Businesswoman of the Year award in 2017. She's currently the chair of the SEMA Board of Directors.
Welcome. Thank you for coming. Over the next 45 minutes, we're going to share a simple but powerful career strategy, one that builds leadership, expands your network, and fuels your professional growth. And it's a pretty simple recipe. You volunteer for something you sincerely care about. You make sure that that organization is positioned for real impact. And sometimes you have to know when to let it go and move on to another opportunity when this mission no longer serves the organization or serves you. So well done. Volunteering becomes a place to flex your leadership skills, a platform to exponentially grow your network, and a critical source of energy. And yes, while you're doing it, you're also making a difference for someone else. Our panel represents 3 extraordinary paths. We have a leader who rose to the highest levels of our industry through decades of volunteer service, Melanie White. We have a woman who first volunteered her life in service to her adopted country and then brought that commitment to our industry, and that's Bailey-Chapman. And In the center and central, Rena is a woman who spent her life working and volunteering in the sport we all care about most, racing. So each of them will show you how volunteering is not an add-on, an extracurricular activity, but it's one of the fastest ways to advance your career. So let's start with leadership, and let's talk about why volunteerism is a really good place, and maybe just really a safe place, to flex your leadership skills. So I'm going to ask Karen to start, and ask her to talk about how volunteering is different than maybe a paid opportunity in terms of developing leadership skills.
Sure, thank you. I mean, there's a few different ways that I've learned from that. Starting with the fact that it expands your network, it exposes you to people with skill sets and experiences that you wouldn't normally have in your general day-to-day job. But for me, it was actually a pivot moment when I originally wanted to join the U.S. military. I wanted to be a helicopter pilot. So adrenaline's kind of a thing for me. So you wonder why I now represent this industry. But after a lot of years in my youth, which, when you're younger, it just feels like every year is a million years, I had to pivot because I wasn't going to be able to serve. And after all those years, well, what do I do next? And I was given an opportunity through my alumni network to volunteer as a Capitol Hill intern in Washington, D.C. Unpaid, sometimes maybe underappreciated, but that's okay. That's part of the gig. And it was that volunteer moment that summer that changed the course and set the pivot to what is now my career today. And that was a moment where I had to sacrifice. Had to work at the Holiday Inn restaurant. This is when seniors ate free back in the day. So in my off time, that's what I did to earn beer and other entertainment money.
Important expense money.
Important expense money, essential expenses. But anyway, so that was probably my first moment of volunteerism. Actually, it was built on a lot of volunteerism in politics that I had done throughout as a child. My dad was involved in politics. So it sort of created that career moment for me, but it really was at a moment of hardship for me and not knowing where my direction was going to be, and then taking that summer to spend that time on Capitol Hill, building a network, getting that experience, and then here I am 20 plus years later.
So, Melanie, what's one leadership skill that you learned first through volunteering, if there is one?
Just one? Jeez. I mean, I think the biggest is it's just when you say yes to something, you're going to learn. And volunteering, I've been able to say yes to a lot of things. And early in my career, I said yes to a lot more. Now I've needed to learn the word no, for sure. But saying yes, and I think saying yes to something that makes you a little bit uncomfortable is really important. And I got a lot of those opportunities early. And I mean, I would never have thought when I first entered this industry that I'd get to be in front of a group of really impressive women and, sharing my story. But I'm excited to be here, and I think it's an awesome opportunity to be able to say yes to things.
So I'm going to skip to a new question, and I'm going to focus on Rena. How has volunteering exponentially expanded your network, or has it?
Of course it has. I think, when I first volunteered in racing, I actually was interested in volunteering for a jazz festival, and that was being organized by the same organization that was organizing that very first Formula One race in Detroit. And they immediately, after I went down and met with them, they immediately asked me to work on that event. And what launched my career in my volunteer career was immediately having access to the people that were actually organizing a major event downtown. And from there, in creating a volunteer organization, it was at two levels. It expanded my career professionally because I was meeting, event management staff, but also the breadth and width of all the volunteers that I got to meet and, the friendships that were cemented in those early years. So, my network has been expanded definitely exponentially, and I also now consider WIMNA as my latest volunteer effort that I'm so grateful that I did say yes, just like Melanie alluded to.
Nice. So Karen, is there one relationship that changed your trajectory?
Oh, goodness. I think it was a series. It was my alumni network, which actually speaks a little bit more to the networking part of it. It's actually why I chose to go to school, where I went to school. And God, there were people that did so much for me and was there when I didn't get to do what I wanted to do, picked me up and opened another door. They put faith in me when I was questioning my own capabilities, my own decision making. Who gets rejected from the military? When you're not a citizen, that's why. It was a citizenship situation. But, it was a network of a handful of people who saw something in me as a snarky, mouthy 17-year-old who had a lot of ambition and drive and channeled that energy and saw something in me that maybe I didn't even see, and then really set me on the course and helped correct me along the way, teach me along the way, gave me patience along the way, and I still reflect almost every day on conversations with those people.
So Melanie, you have this fourth generation business, and it takes a lot of your time, and yet you choose to spend an enormous percentage of that volunteering, and you have for a long time. Has it expanded your network? Is it an important piece of your network?
Of course, it has expanded my network. I mean, because I spend so much time, an enormous amount of time is correct, volunteering. I've been in the industry for 21 years, and I've been volunteering 20 years of that. And I think it's really grown my network, but that's also, this is my group of friends. I mean, what Karen was saying when they saw that she was this spunky, had a lot of energy. I've always had a lot of energy, and so I knew I would get a little bit bored in my own organization, and so volunteering gave me this extra spice. And the people that also volunteer are very similar. They have that extra to give and have that extra energy. So that gave me a lot, that grew my network for sure. But I think in that is volunteering, you will absolutely grow your network, but you also will get a reputation. So it's really important. This industry is so small. It feels really big. It's in the billions we're supporting in the U.S. economy, but it is incredibly small, and especially when you volunteer. So just encourage you as you volunteer to really think about how you're presenting yourself too. Follow through on the things that you say you're going to do. Even though it is a volunteer position and it is not your paid, stay up late and finish that thing you said you were going to get done, because that will follow you. So I think part of that, while it's grown my network for sure, I also had a commitment to it in the beginning, and I luckily had a really great mentor that had taught me that this is a small industry. You want to follow through on what you say you're going to do, and luckily I learned that early, and I'd love all you to know that too.
So I want to go back in a minute to your comment on energy, but before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the unconventional ways, and they're not really unconventional, but they may not be the way that you traditionally think about volunteering, because I think many of us, at least early in our career, think about just donating their time to an organization. But there are many, many ways to volunteer, and obviously, being on a board is one that may be obvious to you as well. But I'd like Karen to talk about, because she's the master of managing, organizing, and influencing and helping people who are volunteering feel productive and be productive.
Yeah, it's, look, for those that may or may not be familiar, both SEMA and PRI have what's called the Sema Action Network, or Sema Action, we've shortened it. And this is our hundreds of thousands of enthusiasts who have actively signed up for getting involved in legislative efforts. So when an alert goes out, whether there's a local racetrack that's threatened by legislation, or the federal and California governments want to take our cars away from us as we know it, to everything in between. This is our go-to of enthusiasts to engage in the political process, to have their voices heard with their lawmakers. But also part of that, so when you look at even SEMA and PRI, we obviously have business members that pay membership dues. But then there's a whole slew of volunteers like Melanie, like Kim, and so many others who go well beyond just sending their membership dues to SEMA and buying their booth at the show. We just got a recognition today, and it was on an advocacy campaign to protect vehicle choice here in the United States, to protect the ability for us to have internal combustion engines. Yes, they were going to be banned. Not lying. You can look at the headlines. And the fact is that we had member companies and content creators who stepped up and put their faces on a campaign during a very contentious presidential campaign, very politically divisive in this country, to talk about what the impact of these mandates or bans, or whichever way you want to look at it, was going to impact our industry, the businesses that it was going to put out of business, the employment and the jobs that it was going to eradicate. And these people really, and they had to answer in their own communities. They had to answer their neighbors that maybe didn't quite see the political side of this or the why behind it. And these are the folks, through the work that we do through SEMA Action, to be able to educate lawmakers, to educate voters, to educate the public about it. Because at the end of the day, I'm just a mouthy lobbyist, right? I'm the one that my team figures out the pathway of how we have to figure out, in the legislative process, how to fix things. But it's the stories of whether you're a driver, a race team owner, a auto body or sports shop owner, or a suspension company, superchargers, all of the different things that exist in our ecosystem that it creates the industry that we have today. Taking that extra step and putting your face and being willing to tell your story is so completely integral to our efforts. But the companies that step up to do this work when they come to Washington or to state capitals with us, that's all volunteerism. And so it's central to the work that we do out of the DC office for SEMA and PRI.
So she was instrumental behind SEMA winning this award that she mentions from the FIA. It's the President's Award. It's a global award. It's for communications excellence with respect to the EV mandate. And she was in the office of the president when that bill was signed, which was, along with Mike Spagnola, in recognition of the importance that SEMA and her organization played in making that happen. So this volunteerism game can be a very, very big deal, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So energy. I think about this always, particularly with respect to Melanie, but it's true, I'm sure, for all of us. She's a mother, she's a wife, she's a business owner, she is a CEO, and yet she finds the time to volunteer, and she really has to think about how she spends that time and how she does it efficiently, because there is no extra time. And so talk about how it gives you energy to volunteer, because I think for you, for Rena, who's done it for a lifetime, it's really important that it doesn't suck the energy out of you. And maybe the reason I put this in is because I've made that mistake so many times. But talk about that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, one of the things that you'll never get back is time. So there's a few resources, time and energy. I think of them the same. And so how you spend your time or how you spend your energy is really important. And I have been very well, I'll say in my 20s, I wasn't that careful about it. As I've, gotten older and definitely into my 40s, I'm much more careful about how I spend my energy. But when I think about that, so I'm thinking about, okay, am I going to say yes to this panel? Yes, I love talking to women, especially women who might be earlier in their career. I remember a few times where I'd hear something and it would help me set me on a different trajectory. And so I thought, I'm a yes for this because I know this will bring me more energy. I'll be excited to be here. I'll come home with extra energy versus being drained. Tomorrow I'll have a board meeting, and I love being a part of that because we're thinking about big picture things. We're thinking about, okay, a decision that we make today, how does it impact us in 10 years? And that is really fun for me, and it's not something I get to do in my everyday life. Sometimes just as a business owner, you're thinking a few feet in front of you, not 10 years down the road. And so being here helps, spark a different part of my brain, and gets me excited about something like an impact that we get to make is going to help a future generation. And so as I think about things that I do, I get very careful and about, is this going to give me more energy? Am I going to feel more excited? Am I going to come back to the office more with more positive or less positive? So I think about that a lot because it's a sacrifice to my family, to my company, to have me gone. And so I really need to be careful that I am coming back with that extra energy.
So Rena, how do you decide when you're just going to send a check and when you're going to actually volunteer your time?
Well, I think maybe my word for energy is passion. I think that, no matter where you volunteer or what captures your interest in giving your time, it has to be something that's a worthwhile investment of that time, something that you feel is very important, whether it's for the local pet shelter or at a racetrack or with SAN or with any number of activities. But, it does take a little bit of responsibility before making that commitment, because just as Melanie said, once you make it, you're making a commitment to that organization, and you want to make sure that your reputation, not just within that organization, but likely nowadays with social media, you don't want anything bad posted, that you're excited about making that, cutting away that time, whether it's from family, from work, from other hobbies or whatever. But I really do believe that it's that excitement, that energy, that passion that really motivates people. And I think there are also some people that just don't get volunteering. And it does take a thought process. Is this something I'm really willing to do?
I'd love to pop in here too. So I recently, and this was more on my personal side, was do I write a check or do I give time? So my son is 16, he plays water polo, and there is this, women have to volunteer in the snack bar or to take funds when you come to the game. And it is not required of men. There is no peer pressure for men to support in any way. And, it's hard because I know come hell or high water, I'm going to my kid's game. But the extra hour that it takes to volunteer or a little bit more, I don't have that. I'm going to make it up in working for my business, for working on a project for SEMA or something. Like, it is filled. And I had to make the decision of, what do I do? There's all of this pressure. And I decided, and luckily I'm in a position where I wrote a check, and I still got a lot of side eyes that I wasn't going to volunteer, but I think that it's really important in how you spend your time too, and sometimes writing a check can get you out of that a little bit.
So that kind of leads us into how do you know when to quit? often you end up in a philanthropic or a volunteer situation because a good friend of yours does it. They encourage you, pressure you, want you to join, and it may not be your thing. So I want to talk a little bit, with the help of this panel, about when do you know when to quit? Karen?
Yeah, I had a hard decision to make, and I won't name the organization that I was involved in, but got invited to join a board, pretty prestigious, and unbeknownst to me, there was a crisis on the horizon with the organization. And being in the professional area that I am, I know crisis communications pretty well, and how to manage political fallout from things that may be decisions that may be unpopular. And so all of a sudden I went from being the new kid around the table, still trying to figure out, where the bathroom is, to now all of a sudden going into crisis mode and having to advise on even just on hiring and firing decisions and course corrections and so forth. And it was tough because I had to take personal hits, in social media. I had to, with, even though I was, working full time, had a full plate, had to take, it was a lot. And it was over the course of probably 3 or 4 years where we had to get everything kind of back on track, fundraising back on track, reputation back on track, operational systems back on track. And all of a sudden I started to see, and it was a lot of hard conversations with some of the people that kind of created the situation of like, okay, stop doing that. This is how we, I had to turn from volunteer to political advisor and have this direction. But after, I guess it was 3 or 4 years, finally getting everything back on track, everything's on the upswing, those same leaders that were still remaining started to revert back to the old behaviors that got us in the mess in the first place. And I'd given up a lot of my professional time, or what could have been my, my own professional development time, my personal time, my family time, my friends' time, my extracurricular activities time to do this. And so when I saw it starting to revert back, I just knew that I can no longer sacrifice, because my professional career was suffering. I knew I wanted to make a change in my career, but I didn't have time to do that. And at the end of the day, that's what pays the bills, that's what pays the mortgage, that's what is going to be sort of long lasting. And so I had to make that hard decision, and I cried about it, because it was an organization that was near and dear to my heart. But I had to make that decision because I couldn't go through that again after sacrificing that amount of time to get everything sort of on right course, and then just to see it kind of fold back. So it was hard because there was a passion attached to it, and a commitment, and an obligation I felt. But you have to make those decisions in your own best interest. And sometimes as women, I think sometimes we don't always act in our own best interest. We default to the community, we default to our families, we default to the environment around us. And it's hard for us, I think, sometimes to be like, nope, I've got to make this for me.
So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Rena, have you had to exit an organization that just was no longer right for you, or maybe not right for its own mission? How do you do it professionally?
Well, I think I guess the first thought I have when I had to do it was pretty early in my, volunteerism. And if you ask me what's one of the skills that I've learned through these years, and that's learning how to say no. And I found myself feeling maybe a sense of obligation in saying yes and accepting the volunteer assignment to begin with. And, I just wasn't, it goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago. I wasn't in love with what I was doing. I didn't particularly enjoy the people I was surrounded by. It was a very similar situation maybe to what Karen was just talking about, where people weren't living up to their commitment, and it just was all wrong. And so I learned pretty early on, pretty soon after I took it on, that this just wasn't for me. But the most important thing that I felt I did at that point was not just to drop out or leave them in the lurch. It was to sit down with the leadership team and talk to them about why it wasn't working for me, and that they really needed somebody that could do a better job in that particular project.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask each of you, you don't have to, but I'm going to ask each of you if you have one specific volunteer recommendation. And Rena, we talked a little bit about this before, of how do you start? How do you get in? Where do you start?
Well, especially for all the young people in the audience, in motorsport, virtually every level, every aspect of motorsports needs volunteers. And these are not necessarily without pay volunteers. Some of them are paid, but it's kind of the weekend warriors, whether it's a team, a racetrack, a league, Sports Car Club of America officials, the leagues need officiating. Virtually every aspect of motorsports uses volunteers in one way or another. And so, I think as we're talking about the kind of skills, part of what attracts me to volunteer on projects is knowing, even at my age, that I'm going to learn different skills from what I'm doing. And so I would just encourage, as we're presenting and you're all kind of, self-thinking there, well, what could I do? What would interest me? Is, to think about a pathway that you might want to get to. Sort of, I think there was an allusion this morning to building your own momentum. Think about what you can, what pathway you want to take, and frankly, pursue it, and not necessarily doing the same things you're doing in your day-to-day life.
Thank you. Melanie?
So my volunteering path actually started through mentorship. So there was a woman who served on the SEMA board 20 years ago, and she was the only woman, and it was 20 board members at that time. And I sort of started to just follow her path. And I was in outside sales at the time and actually called on the business that she owned, and I asked to talk to her about that, and she said, I want to be your mentor. And she volunteered a ton. She had volunteered within a certain segment under SEMA, and then also volunteered within the SEMA board of directors. And with that, I knew I was getting way more than she was getting from me, but I think she still was learning something from me too. But with that, she would allow me to come to, she would invite me to come to certain events that she was volunteering at, and she knew I would be there to help. And so she'd even let me stay in her room with her. She was that generous. And with that generosity, I also got to see the different habits that she had. So I got to see that, she still went to the bar and had a drink, but she was in bed by a certain time, and she was up early, and she was reading the paper, she was prepping for her day. And so I got to see a front row to her habits, and then I got to see also how she raised her hand. So we would be at a volunteer event, and she would have an idea, and so it just gave me that confidence. And then I also had someone to call and say, hey, I have this idea, what should I do with it? And she'd give me a pathway for that too. So I feel incredibly lucky for that. I don't think you're going to find a lot of that, and I'm not paying it forward where I'm letting someone stay in my room either. So I think there was that pathway, and that was the part with saying yes, is I said yes to almost everything she invited me to. And then I also said yes to everything that she also sort of raised my hand for me too. And I said yes to those too, and that helped tremendously.
So Karen, you might actually have some volunteer opportunities.
Yeah, lots of volunteer opportunities. But I'm going to go back actually to 11-year-old Karen. So I grew up in a family that was very volunteer focused, community focused. So we've a lot of work in our church, a lot of work in our local community. As I mentioned, my family was involved in local politics. So my dad served on city council, and then he decided to run for mayor. And I said to my mom, because this is now his third campaign, I said, I'd like to be campaign manager. I told you I was spunk. Or Melanie gave you the better word. I'm spunky. And my mom's like, no, that's my job. But you know what? I need you to be the volunteer coordinator, because my dad had an exceptional number of volunteers that helped him throughout the years of his elections. And even now that I'm in the profession of politics, it's really incredible when I reflect back at how many people volunteered on my dad's campaigns and worked really long hours in helping him. So my job was volunteer coordinator, so that was everything from, getting signs ready, walk lists, ordering pizza every night, all of these kinds of things. And I think what that did was, whether my mom realized it or not, is really set the example for how I look at volunteerism. And it's a sort of a story way of telling you that sometimes you just walk in and you just do whatever job they need you to do, because you're there to be additive. You're there to help fill a gap. You're there to help fill a function. And even if it's something you have no idea what to do, I've volunteered as a race operations person because I was at a race event and I had nothing else to do. I'm like, you need some help? And I don't know race operations, but I learned. And so, I think it's just be open to take on whatever job that they need you to do, because that's actually going to be additive to the organization or to the event or whatever you're serving. And learn from that. You may actually find you like to do something that you never would have tried otherwise, and also you're going to develop a reputation for having that openness and willing to kind of, even though it's not the sexy job, you're not the campaign manager, but the fact is that what you're doing actually could make somebody else's job that much easier in a really stressful time, and especially like Rena in events like what you're running and doing. It's so important. And so I'd say just the one piece of advice is take the job that someone needs filled, and learn from it.
Yeah, and if I could just add on to it, that type of an example, my experience with all the volunteers I work with, a lot of times, not just taking what is needed, but also being able to maybe do something so opposite of what you are accustomed to. We have a department, I've worked on these temporary circuit open wheel races almost my whole career, and we need help in virtually every aspect of producing those events. And one of the things that happens is volunteers help build the track and tear it down. And we had everything from janitors to doctors on this track services team helping to build the track. So I just want to reinforce what Karen is saying, that be available to do what's needed at the time.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So are there any questions from the audience? Oh, come on, we didn't do that good a job. No?
Oh, there's one over there in the white shirt. What are some resources to find opportunities?
Well, there's 3 of them here.
From my experience, typically there are organizations in each major market anyway. I can only speak for urban areas, but typically there now are websites with volunteer opportunities. The local, Convention and Visitors Bureau will offer opportunities. Obviously, as I said before, if you have a specific interest in motorsports, call, the local track, the local race team's office, whatever. I mean, earlier in one of the breakouts, I heard Alba Cologne talk about how many phone calls they get every day from people interested in working with them. So, there are listings all over the website, but beyond that, if you have a particular interest, pursue it.
I'll speak on the SEMA side of things too. So within SEMA, they have councils and networks, and which allows different areas. So within the councils and networks, there's something for truck and off-road. There's something for racing specifically. So if there is a niche that you are interested in, there would be volunteer opportunities on that too. And on the SEMA website, you can see you can get to the councils and network and you can explore all the different avenues, but there's one that's the SEMA Business Women's Network, and there's a lot of volunteer opportunities in that too.
And if you're interested, there are extraordinary opportunities on the legal side, on the regulatory side, which is what has interested me primarily because I feel we need to do that work to save our industry. And it's given me an extraordinary amount of energy. It's not something I ever thought I would want to do because my dad wasn't mayor. But there is a lot of opportunity to meet a lot of people at different levels doing different things. And it's extremely rewarding because it ensures that this meeting will be happening next year, the year after, and 30 years from now. Any other questions?
There's one right there.
Yes.
I think they've got a mic.
Hello. So I'm actually one of the leaders at GM Motorsports for our volunteer organization for K-12 STEM education. And sometimes we struggle staffing our volunteer events because obviously in such a high pressure environment, a lot of people have full plates already. So what are some strategies to excite and inspire people that already have a full plate to want to volunteer and inspire the next generation?
I mean, I would say, I mean, from our perspective, I think some of it's culture building and, you know, promoting the work that those volunteers are doing so that the next set of people are seeing it. There might be people that are not aware, or maybe they're too afraid because they're not sure what their commitment are. So I think it's almost like you have to market your own volunteer work and your volunteers and giving them recognition and helping people understand what they may not even know. Because I think that's one of the, you know, we were talking at the lunch breakout that I was in today, and it's like, I think one of the hardest things within our industry, and I don't think it's unique to our industry, is for people to find their way in, because it's the fear of the unknown. And when you're the new kid and you don't necessarily come maybe from a motorsports background or whatever, you don't even know where to start. You almost have a bit of imposter syndrome by showing up at the door. So I think the more that you market and create a culture of that volunteer crew, and I think the councils and networks are very much like that within SEMA, each one has a personality, each one has a culture, then that helps foster the next generation in growing that volunteer base.
So we're out of time. In fact, we're a little bit over, but I think it was worth it. I hope you understand that volunteering done right is not kind of a sidebar, but actually a career strategy. And I hope you'll choose to volunteer. Thank you very much.